Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. And today we're going to be talking about something pretty heavy, pretty dark. We're going to be talking about the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, that one's
it's a tough one.
a tough one for sure. It's probably one of the most infamous mass shootings in American history.
Yeah, and we're coming up on 40 years since it happened.
Oh, wow.
This July.
Yeah.
July 18th, 1984. So we're going to be diving into the Wikipedia article about it. It's a really detailed, pretty well-sourced article. Goes into a lot of the nuances and a lot of the details of that day. And we're going to try and unpack some of that for you.
Yeah, it's crazy how one event like this can really have so many ripple effects. It's kind of like a stone dropped in a pond and the ripples go out in all directions.
Yeah, for sure.
And we see in everything from like law enforcement tactics to the whole gun control debate. It's, a lot of things stem from this one event.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. This happened at a McDonald's in San Ysidro, California, a suburb of San Diego. And the perpetrator was a guy named James Huberty. And the article goes into a bit of his background, kind of like the lead up to that day. And it's really fascinating, I think, to look at that and to see, was there anything that could have been done or
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like to see.
Yeah, were there signs?
Yeah, were there signs, exactly. And there's a lot of talk about mental health. This was 1984.
Yeah.
So mental health awareness and mental health care was very different than it is today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, back then it was so stigmatized.
Yeah.
And there just weren't as many resources available.
Right. And Huberty, he did actually try to seek help. He called a mental health clinic like 2 days before.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But they misspelled his name
Oh, no.
as Schuberty.
Oh,
And because he wasn't like outwardly agitated on the phone, they marked it as a non-crisis.
oh, so they basically they didn't take it seriously enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah. They basically said they would call him back, but they never did.
Oh, my God.
And there's this really eerie detail in the article where it says that he told his wife he was going hunting for humans.
Oh, my God. Like chills. Literally, it's like, it's hindsight, obviously, but it's so disturbing.
Yeah.
To think that those words were actually spoken.
Right.
It makes you wonder, like, how do we, as a society, even begin to address these kinds of warning signs?
Right. And it's a tough question because you don't want to infringe on people's rights, but you also don't want something like this to happen.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Right.
Between individual freedom and the safety of the community.
Yeah. So Huberty, he enters this McDonald's and he's heavily armed. He's got a Browning pistol, an Uzi, a shotgun, and he just starts firing indiscriminately
Oh, God.
at people. I mean, men, women, children, it didn't matter.
Just a complete disregard for human life.
Yeah, just a senseless act of violence. And you think about the terror, the chaos that ensued in that McDonald's. People scrambling for cover, trying to hide.
It's unimaginable, isn't it?
It is. The youngest victim was only 8 months old.
8 months old.
8 months old.
Oh, God. That's just horrific.
Yeah, the oldest was 74.
It really shows the randomness of it all.
Yeah. And the article mentions this one boy, Keith Thomas. He survived by playing dead.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he hid under a booth with his friend while, bullets are flying all around them.
Hard to even comprehend the trauma.
Yeah, and then you read these details, like Huberty was taunting people. He was saying things like he had killed 1,000 and would kill 1,000 more. And there's this one particularly heartbreaking story about a baby, Carlos Reyes. He sat up crying just before he was shot.
Oh, God. It's just gut-wrenching. It's so easy to get caught up in the numbers, but each one of those victims was a person with a family and a life.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that, behind every statistic is a human story.
Absolutely.
A life that was cut short, a family that was shattered.
And a community that was forever changed.
So let's talk about the police response. Now, this is where things get a little bit complicated. Initially, there was a lot of confusion.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The first reports that came in actually sent officers to a different McDonald's 2 miles away.
What?
Yeah.
How did that even happen?
Miscommunication.
Wow.
They got the address wrong. So it took them longer to arrive at the actual scene.
So precious time was lost because of a simple mistake.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder of how, even in a crisis, communication is absolutely vital.
Yeah, it can literally be the difference between life and death.
And this whole thing, this whole siege lasted 77 minutes.
77 minutes.
Yeah.
That's an eternity.
It's a long time to be living through that kind of terror.
Can you imagine being trapped inside that McDonald's with them for that long?
I can't even begin to imagine.
It's just horrifying to think about.
It really is. And this event, happening in 1984, this was sort of a turning point for law enforcement.
Oh, how so?
It made them realize that they needed to be better equipped to handle these kinds of situations, what we now call active shooter situations. And back then, SWAT teams, they weren't as common. They weren't as well trained.
So this event really forced them to reevaluate their tactics and their training.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's amazing to think about how much has changed since then in terms of law enforcement's response to these kinds of incidents.
Yeah, and we'll delve into that a little bit more in a later part of the episode. But for now, let's focus on what happened at the McDonald's.
Okay.
So after those 77 minutes, a SWAT sniper who was positioned on a nearby rooftop was able to take a shot at Huberty, killing him and ending the siege.
That must have been an incredibly difficult decision for everyone involved.
Yeah, but it was a decision that had to be made.
Yeah, it ultimately ended the nightmare.
Right.
But the aftermath must have been just devastating for everyone involved.
Yeah, for the victims, for their families, for the first responders who had to witness such a horrific scene. And, the article mentions that a lot of the police officers who were there that day later suffered from PTSD.
Yeah, PTSD wasn't really talked about back then.
No.
It was kind of like a hidden wound.
Yeah. But it's a real thing, and it can have a profound impact on people's lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for the people of San Ysidro, this event left a deep scar on their community.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, the McDonald's where it happened, it was demolished shortly after the massacre.
Really? They tore it down?
Yeah. It was never rebuilt at that location.
That's really symbolic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like trying to erase this horrible memory.
Yeah. And in its place, they built a memorial to the victims. 21 white marble pillars, each one representing a life lost.
It's a somber reminder of the human cost of this senseless act of violence.
Yeah, and it's a place where people can go to remember, to reflect, and to heal.
That's really important, to have a place where people can grieve and come together as a community.
Yeah.
To support each other and try to make sense of what happened.
Absolutely.
And, we were talking about the ripple effects earlier, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't just some isolated thing that happened in a vacuum.
Right.
It really kind of sparked this whole national debate about gun control in America.
Yeah, that's right. The article doesn't really take sides on the issue or go into a lot of the politics, which, I appreciate. It just presents the facts as they are.
Right, exactly. And I think that's really important because we want people to be able to form their own opinions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Based on, just the information and not on any kind of bias.
Exactly. So let's talk about some of those legal battles that the article mentions, because there are actually quite a few.
Right.
And one of them was actually filed by Huberty's widow, Etna.
Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and she actually sued both McDonald's and Huberty's former employer, Babcock and Wilcox.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating case.
So what was her argument? What was she claiming?
So basically, she was saying that, a combination of factors led to Huberty's actions.
Okay.
She said that he had been exposed to toxic metals as a welder.
Right, okay.
And that coupled with his, heavy consumption of McDonald's food.
Oh, interesting.
Somehow caused him to snap.
So she was blaming his workplace at McDonald's for his mental state.
Yeah, pretty much. And she specifically pointed to MSG.
MSG.
Yeah, monosodium glutamate.
Oh, well.
Which is a common flavor enhancer in a lot of processed foods.
Yeah.
And she was saying that could have been a trigger for his violent behavior.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is, and it's definitely controversial.
Yeah, you don't hear that every day.
No, you don't.
So what happened with that lawsuit? Did it go anywhere?
No, it was eventually dismissed, just like the lawsuits that were filed by the victims' families.
So ultimately, the courts didn't find any merit to those claims.
Right.
It's just such a complex and tragic situation.
Yeah, and it really raises all these questions about responsibility and accountability.
Yeah, where do we draw the line?
Right.
It's not always clear cut.
No, it's not, and I think that's something that we as a society are still grappling with today.
Definitely. But beyond the legal fallout, what were some of the lasting impacts of this massacre? I mean, it must have had a huge impact on law enforcement in particular.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the article talks about how the San Diego Police Department underwent some major changes after this.
Like what kinds of changes?
Well, for starters, they really beefed up their SWAT team. increased their training frequency, gave them more powerful firearms,
Right.
and they also implemented more rigorous protocols for responding to active shooter calls.
Yeah, because at the time of the massacre, SWAT teams weren't as common or as well equipped as they are today, right?
Exactly. I mean, this was 1984, so it was really like a wake-up call for law enforcement agencies all over the country.
Yeah. They realized they needed to be better prepared to handle these kinds of situations.
Yeah, they realized that waiting for a sniper to show up like they did in this case was not a viable long-term solution.
So this tragedy really led to a lot of improvements in the way that police departments respond to active shooter situations.
Yeah, and a lot of those changes have been adopted by police departments nationwide.
It's interesting how something so horrific can actually lead to positive change.
Yeah, it's kind of like a silver lining, I guess.
Yeah, but it's also a reminder that sometimes it takes a tragedy to really shake things up and force people to make those changes.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's often the case.
And it's not just about law enforcement either.
What do you mean?
Well, the San Ysidro massacre also highlighted the importance of community preparedness and individual vigilance.
Oh, right. I see what you're saying.
You know, because in an active shooter situation, things can happen so fast
Right.
that waiting for the police to arrive might not be an option.
So you're saying it's important for individuals to be aware of their surroundings and know what to do in a crisis.
Exactly. And we see that now with all the active shooter drills that are being conducted in schools, businesses, other public places.
Yeah, I remember doing those drills in school.
Yeah, me too.
And at the time, I didn't really fully grasp the gravity of it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's scary stuff to think about, but it's important.
Yeah, it's about being prepared, not paranoid.
Exactly. The more we know and the more we prepare, the better equipped we'll be to handle these kinds of situations if they ever arise.
Right, and potentially save lives.
Exactly.
It's about being proactive rather than reactive.
Yeah, and it's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a safer society.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening, you know?
Yeah, it has.
It's not just about the horrific details of the massacre, but also about the broader context of gun violence, mental health, and societal responsibility.
Yeah, and the article does a good job of connecting all those dots
It really does.
without getting bogged down in the politics of it all.
Yeah, it's informative without being preachy,
Right.
which I appreciate.
Me too.
So what does all of this mean for us today, 40 years after this tragedy? What are the takeaways?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that we can't afford to be complacent.
Yeah, we can't just sweep this issue under the rug and pretend it's not happening.
Right. We need to keep pushing for solutions, keep advocating for change, keep having these difficult conversations about gun violence, mental health, and societal responsibility.
It's about remembering the victims, honoring their memory, and working tirelessly to prevent future tragedies.
And it's about acknowledging that there are no easy answers.
Yeah, there's no magic bullet solution.
Right. Pun intended.
It's a complex issue with a lot of different factors at play.
But that doesn't mean we should give up on finding solutions.
Absolutely not. We need to keep asking the tough questions, challenging the status quo, demanding better from our leaders and ourselves.
And as individuals, we can each play a role in creating a safer society.
Yeah, even small actions can make a difference.
Like what?
Well, for one, we can all promote mental health awareness.
Right.
Talk about it. Openly encourage people to seek help if they need it.
Okay, what else?
We can advocate for responsible gun ownership.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Support common sense gun laws, background checks, waiting periods, things like that.
And we can also just try to be more empathetic and compassionate towards each other.
Yes, exactly. Foster a culture of kindness and understanding.
Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And only by working together can we hope to create a world where tragedies like the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre become a relic of the past, not a recurring nightmare. You know, it's interesting as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre. I keep thinking about how this event impacted the community, you know, beyond the immediate casualties and the trauma.
Right.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the shocking violence, and all but the ripple effects on San Ysidro go much deeper.
For sure. And the article mentions how the massacre brought some existing racial tensions to the surface.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because a lot of the victims were of Mexican or Mexican-American descent.
Oh, wow, I see.
So it wasn't just about gun violence. It also exposed these existing inequalities and prejudices within the community.
Right, and that adds another layer of complexity to this already horrific event.
Yeah. How did this impact the community's healing process, do you think?
Well, it's important to remember that this tragedy happened in a community that already had its own unique set of challenges.
Yeah. San Ysidro being a border town with a largely Hispanic population, There were already these existing tensions, and then the massacre amplified them.
Right.
And it led some people to question, would the law enforcement response have been different if the victims had been primarily white?
Yeah, that's a really tough question to grapple with.
It is, and it's a question that I think a lot of communities are still struggling with today.
Yeah, for sure. And what about the decision to demolish the McDonald's where the shooting occurred? Was that a direct result of the community's desire to just erase this painful memory?
The article doesn't really go into specifics about, the community's sentiment towards the building, but it does mention that McDonald's donated the land to the city.
Hmm.
It's almost as if they recognized the huge impact this event had on the community, and they chose to relinquish ownership of that space.
Right. And now instead of a fast food restaurant, there's a memorial. 21 white marble pillars, each one representing a life lost.
Yeah, it's a really powerful image.
It is. And it's a testament to the community's resilience. They chose to transform a place of tragedy into a space for remembrance and healing.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can emerge, and communities can find ways to honor their lost loved ones while also moving forward.
Right. It's about finding that balance between remembering the past and looking towards the future.
Exactly. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We explored the chilling details of the massacre, the complexities of the legal battles, the ripple effects on law enforcement tactics, and the broader context of gun violence and societal inequalities.
Yeah, it's been a heavy but incredibly informative journey.
It has, and what strikes me is how this single event, as horrific as it was, has had such far-reaching implications.
It really had. It's like that stone dropped in a pond. The ripples just keep spreading outwards.
Right, and it forced us to confront some really uncomfortable truths about our society.
And it prompted changes that continue to shape our world today.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. The San Ysidro McDonald's massacre serves as a really potent reminder of the human cost of violence, and it challenges us to reflect on the choices we make, both individually and collectively.
Right. It's a call to action in a way.
Yeah, and to strive for a world where these kinds of tragedies are no longer a part of our reality. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we hope this conversation encourages you to continue exploring the complexities of this event and its lasting impact on our society.